Welcome into the show. We are fueled by Hattie B's Hot Chicken. It's always good to see David Ubben of The Athletic, also the host of Until Saturday, a show about college football, and that is exactly what we're going to talk about here. David, we appreciate you stopping by, as always, to make us smarter. I didn't realize that you also, in your career, covered the University of Oklahoma, not just the University of Tennessee, going back to the time when Josh Heupel was the quarterbacks coach there.
It's the first time I met Josh, but let me tell you, I am blamed for a lot of the 2009 season. If you don't recall, that was my first professional job at the Oklahoma, and I was covering OU. And the very first game, they're playing BYU, the very first football game ever in Cowboys Stadium. And in the second quarter, Sam Bradford gets hit, and his shoulder basically explodes, and the season, which started with a team ranked number 3 going in, they ended up going 7-5, I want to say, and played in the Sun Bowl against some guy named Andrew Luck and Stanford. So yeah, I probably took a lot of the blame for the way that season played out. That's on me. One of our columnists said mid-season, because Oklahoma State was flopping that year too, he said, we used to play some pretty good football around here. So you got here, so I don't know what happened. So yeah.
Titans fans probably say that about us with this radio show. They've been pretty bad. They've been pretty bad since they put us on the air a couple of years ago.
So. Hey, sounds like the Vols might need you in Norman, David.
Truly.
Maybe we'll see. I was a very bad luck because the basketball team also started in the top 15. I think they went like 10-27 or something that year. So I'm not going to bring up the fact that Tennessee has flourished since I left the beat. I was there for the entirety of the Jeremy Pruitt era.
Good luck chuck of college football fan bases. What the hell is happening?
I think there's something to that.
David Ubben here with us on 104.5 The Zone. You're a storyteller by trade, so there's a lot of compelling storylines about this game, about this full circle moment for the coach of Tennessee and for an Oklahoma program that, maybe has had their championship or their playoff expectations altered a little bit by the nature of the injuries that they've sustained in the early goings here. But from the Heupel thread, I guess, what are you most interested to see from him specifically on game day?
Well, I guess two things. One, with Josh Heupel, actions speak a lot louder than words. I think he's purposefully kind of boring and has played down a lot of this stuff. I thought going into this week, it's going to be really interesting to see what game day is able to kind of get out of him on this. Because it's always different with broadcast holders and access and all of those things. But Josh has never had any interest in kind of talking about the Oklahoma situation, which isn't maybe as interesting as people think it is. It's not like this blood feud. It's just kind of feeling a little bit betrayed, I think, from Josh's perspective. He wanted to run a different style of offense than Bob Stoops was kind of keen on doing. And then I think for him, a guy who had so much history over the last 20 years with Bob, and then for him to get fired and then bring in Lincoln Riley and completely change everything that they did, a lot of the same things, tempo, playing a little more pass heavy, wanting to do those things. I think there's a level of betrayal there that he certainly feels, now, but I think in a lot of ways that fueled him. So for me, if I'm looking at Saturday, when I say actions speak louder than words, if they're up 13 in the fourth quarter, how hard are they still trying to score? I'm a little curious, I got to tell you. But I think, Josh is very well received and well thought of in Norman and in Oklahoma. He still talks to teammates and stuff, and the fans appreciate everything that he did. He was the last guy under center the last time that Oklahoma won a national title. I think, the way that Tennessee fans view T. Martin, I think it's kind of similar to the way that fans view Josh Heupel. Like, Josh Heupel was a really good player, was not a world beater necessarily, like one of the greatest quarterbacks you're ever going to see. That Oklahoma team was fueled by defense a lot of the time, but he is still beloved there, despite the fact that his time and his period of kind of being the unspoken coach in waiting didn't go the way that he wanted. But this, I think, will be a really emotional weekend for him. And, his mom, passed this offseason, and this will be the first time kind of going back to Oklahoma when she's not there. And I think that, as much as the Bob Stoops stuff, who I don't know if Bob will be at the game or not, I think he'll be pretty low key if he does go. That is maybe as big as anything that they're going to be talking about on the game broadcast or on game day.
Going back to how he might act if he's up 14 and how much more they might score. They just kicked an onside. They just did an onside kick against Kent State. David, this man is ruthless. Clearly,
I said, well, I just recorded our podcast. We were kind of talking about this game, and I said, here's the thing about Josh is he doesn't talk a big game. Low key, kind of a killer. Low key, you see it. You kind of see it come out in little moments. And again, I think for him, actions speak a lot louder than words. And, the onside kick stuff is kind of whatever. They said they got to read, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But he's not one for mercy. So we'll see how this goes. I think on paper, you could probably tell I'm leaning. I think Tennessee's just a better team on both sides of the ball. Oklahoma banged up, still trying to figure some things out. But, on paper, I just think Tennessee's a much better team than Oklahoma, who's been really, really underwhelming so far this season, coming off of last year when Oklahoma seemed to kind of bounce back from that rough first year under Brent Venables.
The aforementioned podcast is Until Saturday, a show about college football. Subscribe to it wherever you get your podcast. David Ubben is our guest of The Athletic.
Low-key a killer, David. It's an interesting way to put it because, like you said, that's not the Heupel that we see at the podium, right? He's not the red-faced coach on the sideline tearing into players and officials most of the time. Is that kind of what you hear from coaches around college football that know Heupel, have coached with him, coached against him? And what would Tennessee have to do this year, you think, for him to start to get into that echelon that we talk about with not the Kirby Smarts of the world necessarily, but those coaches in that tier under him, so to speak?
Well, it wasn't going very good at UCF. I mean, that's the reality. And I think for some people, when you look at the totality of his career, that weighs it down for some people. But I think since he embraced this Baylor system, basically when he went to Missouri, it's been pretty good, despite the fact that, defensively they had a lot of issues at UCF and all that stuff. And there's a lot of the reason why he wasn't necessarily welcomed with a parade when he got here. But as far as his approach, I think it's the quarterback in him. The public face is going to be, I'm the same guy every single day. I'm not going to get too far out there on a limb when I talk. I'm going to take a lot of the focus off of me. But when the lights are on and when, things are on, he seems to have shown up and stuff obviously means a lot to him. And you see him be a lot more emotional in the moment and a lot more animated in the moment than after the moment. And I think that's just being a quarterback forever. And that bleeds over. You think about defensive coordinators, defensive coaches generally are a little more spicy on the sidelines. And you see him be pretty even keel. Again, I think it goes back to just being a quarterback.
So this game is being treated, understandably so. It's the first SEC game for both of these programs right now. It's Oklahoma's first ever SEC game, so there is also that wrinkle to it. But for Vols fans, David, and obviously you're familiar with the fan base at this point in your tenure, they almost seem to be treating this as, okay, if we win this one, then we have legitimate college football playoff hopes with Alabama and Georgia also on the schedule, because if you win this one, it allows for some margin of error. And I'm almost surprised at how much credence this specific game is being given for what you're talking about, the way that Oklahoma looks at the start of the season, the fact that Tennessee is a 7-point road favorite in this game, and definitively, by any stretch of the imagination, other than the unpredictability of 18 and 19-year-olds in a road game in college football, they should win this game. They should win this game.
Yeah, well, when you have a team that looks like the way Tennessee does, your schedule gets a little bit simpler. You start looking at Kentucky and saying, it's going to be hard for us to lose that game. You're going to have to play really, really bad to lose that game. Tennessee's got a really good roster. So I think for me, you win this game, I think it feels like the key because the pressure is off of you. If at this point, if you're Tennessee and you take care of business the rest of the season, if you win this game, you're 10-2. You got to win over NC State. You got to win over Oklahoma. We'll see kind of how the rest of the schedule sorts out. If they have another top 25 win that sneaks in there, maybe you get that. You're probably more likely than not getting into the playoff at 10-2 with that resume. Maybe not, but I like your chances. And you got a great shot to beat Alabama in Knoxville. And Georgia, we'll see. You got kind of nothing to lose in that game in Athens. You can go out there and do whatever you got to do. You hope that maybe it looks a little bit different than that 2022 game. But if you win this game, you got a bunch of house money when it comes to making the playoff, and not just making the playoff, but having one of those 4 on-campus games to start the season. And if that's not the case, if you split that Alabama and Georgia game, you can get to Atlanta. A lot of people talking about the playoff. What about Atlanta? If you're 11-1 and you split Alabama and Georgia, you're probably in Atlanta. And that's meaningful, I think, to a lot of people, that I think it's been overlooked as people talking about, making the playoff.
With that said, 5-star quarterback Nico Iamaleava, who's flashed, who's been impressive in the first 3 games, going up against 5-star quarterback Jackson Arnold, who has had some struggles and hasn't been helped by an O-line plagued by injuries and receivers and everything. But all of that said, which quarterback, which team do you think faces more pressure in Norman on Saturday?
Well, I mean, I guess probably Oklahoma, just because when you're talking about Brent Venables, this team and this season looks a lot more like 22 than it does in 23. And for better or worse, Oklahoma put all their chips in the Jackson Arnold basket. And they said, Dylan Gabriel, thanks for everything you did for us. You played a great 2 seasons. Have fun. And he's at Oregon. Mixed results for them out there too. But if he struggles, and especially if Dylan Gabriel is sitting there in New York City at the end of the year, it's going to look very, very different. And listen, recruiting and all that stuff, it's complicated. Assessment, evaluation is complicated. But if you lose this game in resounding fashion, if you're Oklahoma, that's kind of a problem. If you're Tennessee, you still got quite a bit of house money, big picture. If you're Josh Heupel, if you're Nico Iamaleava, you got a shot, and you still got some games down the rest of the season that you can win. And I think maybe if you lose this game, it lowers the ceiling. It says, well, maybe NC State wasn't as good as we thought. Maybe this team's not maybe as good as we thought. But I don't know, man. You look at this team, defensive front, the offensive line has been better than people thought, and that's probably the weakest spot on the team, that or the secondary. And I've said it for 2 years, if Nico is that dude, like, Tennessee's going to be a factor. And to this point, he's showing extremely high levels of that dudeness through 4 games or whatever he's played. So
I need some kind of meter, some kind of metric for that dudeness.
That dudeness.
As patented by David
I think
Ubben.
at the very least, you need him to be an upgrade at quarterback from last year and maybe be close to what Hendon Hooker gave you in 2022. I think to this point, he clearly looks like an upgrade from Joe Milton, who this staff loved and was all in on, and probably got more of a longer leash than he maybe deserved, especially when you have, a Nico Ferrari sitting in the garage. But, we'll see.
We need to fade. He has that dog in him. I think at this point it's tired, it's overused, and replace it with that dudeness.
No. That dog in him, Lucas, it does not matter how long we go. It will always make me laugh to see the X-rays with a pit bull in somebody's chest. For the internet alone, it has to stay. Okay,
for the internet,
it's tough for a quarterback to have that dog in him. That's usually reserved for guys who take a little bit more contact. Yeah. I think Nico has got a ways to go before we argue whether or not he has the dog in him. But he's definitely got that dudeness, no question about that. Okay, showing very strong signs.
All right, so we've established differentiation in the metrics, because I'm covering a quarterback with the Titans right now that can't stop taking hits, David.
Too much dog.
Yeah, definitely Will Levis for sure needs to lower the levels of dog in him. No question about that.
I heard you guys talking on Until Saturday when I was listening this morning about the 10% talent fee that Tennessee is placing on ticket prices for fans that will go towards paying student athletes. And it's interesting, David. There's obviously been criticism on this, but for the most part, Tennessee fans have been saying, take my money. Yes, better players. I'll pay 10% more. Danny White kind of striking while the iron's hot, right, with this team being good and a lot of buzz. But you took a little bit of issue with it, it sounded like, as well. What was your stance on it?
Well, I think I haven't heard a lot of blowback from Tennessee fans on my thoughts, because it's not a Tennessee issue. Let's make that clear. This is a college sports issue that we're going to see more often. We've probably seen it, snuck in other places where, it hasn't been. Georgia raised their ticket price. They specifically said it's not because of the House settlement or possibly having to pay players. But the reality is, at the current state of college football, everybody's out there, you got to give to our collective. You got to give to our collective. And that sounds nice, and everybody's all in the same boat. What you're doing is you're asking the fans to pay the players. It's distasteful in any flavor. And now you're doing the same thing now that the school is supposed to have quote unquote revenue sharing with athletes as we sort of turn toward the House settlement becoming enacted, and a lot of moving pieces there. But that seems like a question of when, not if, that revenue sharing comes to college football. We're supposed to be getting some of that TV money, and they'll get some of it. But what we're seeing is that bill getting passed along to the fans, which is ridiculous. And I think for a long time, so many athletic departments cry broke because they have to be nonprofits. You got to spend the money as soon as it comes in. You don't have any reserves. And so now you've got this budget that is right up against your ceiling. And now your costs are about to go up. And you've been running this thing and pretending to be a nonprofit. And it's been really hard to watch as they sort of push this idea on people who aren't as in tune with how budgeting and the economics of a college campus and college sports work. It's very easy to say, well, look, we got to give these athletes everything we can. The money is not going to the quote unquote athletes, as they would like to say. Yes, it's nice to have nice facilities. The facilities are way nicer. You don't need a recording studio and a barbershop and, world-class food and all that stuff. Just pay your guys. And that's not where we've been. Not to say nothing of, hey, we got to pay our AD, high seven figures, and he's got to have 3 or 4 of his lieutenants who are also pushing 7 figures, and we got to pay the coach $10 million. You've had to pay, and the money has largely gone to administrators, coaches, and facilities. And now you want to cry broke because you've been poorly spending. I get that it's hard and to go to somebody that has a lot of pull on a campus and say, well, we're going to have to, come back on your salary. I don't think that's ever going to happen. And the reality is that fans are going to take the brunt of this, and it's garbage. But just don't let them say that this is what they're doing and sort of just let them get away with it. That's my only thought, basically.
Yeah, because that was the prevailing thought, to Lucas's point. Fans are just like, yeah, sure. I mean, you just justify it by telling us that we're paying.
The Bills hit different at 3-0 and top 10 than they do at 1-2. Let's see Florida State roll that out. Let's see how that goes for the Seminoles.
God, Mike Norvell.
Talent fee next year, guys. We gotta fix this.
If they could just get the fire alarms to stop playing during his press conferences, that would be it.
Yeah, that was a tough look. That was a tough look. At least he was managed to get a water bottle open. That's at least he's avoided that fate. That was a tough look too.
I love that we are at this point in the season where this stuff is starting to become a part of
the day. 2 weeks.
I know. It makes me happy. It just means football's back.
Brian Kelly's bashing tables in week 1.
Fake mad Brian
tough
Kelly.
Look, it's been, listen, Brian Kelly, he had to give that water bottle the business. They had to fight back. When Billy Napier, the water bottle has been low key one of the more interesting storylines of the college football season.
There are other top 25 matchups this weekend. It's not just Tennessee, Oklahoma, although that is the thing that consumes us here locally. I am fascinated by 3-0 Illinois and number 22 Nebraska in Lincoln, where the Cornhuskers are legit.
We'll see.
That is the appropriate response to me raising my voice the way that I did. Yes,
they're going to make a bowl game. The bowl stuff is done. I think Nebraska has figured that out. I think the interesting thing for me in this, you have a Nebraska team that's given up 1 sack through 3 games. They gave up 30 last year. They're 87th nationally in that stat. They're 9th this year. And some of that's probably play calling. Some of that is having a more competent quarterback that's going to process and make better decisions and is comfortable getting the ball out. And he's going to be tested against an Illinois team that, they're 8th nationally in blitz rate. That's going to be a huge test for them. So it's going to be an interesting game. I think Illinois, it's maybe their rep is coasting a little bit on beating a Kansas team that's been really, really disappointing this year. But Nebraska, I think they have a moderate to low ceiling, but their floor has been raised under Matt Rule. They're going to get to a bowl game. It's been 7-something years since they've been. It's crazy to think about, but this is a pretty good team. And, they seemingly have fixed a lot of the turnover issues, and they should have gone to a bowl last year, but they were like 120th something in turnover margin. And well, that has a pretty acute impact on your win-loss record when you do that.
We've got USC Michigan in Ann Arbor in a classic Big Ten matchup, 2:30 on CBS. If USC is able to beat Michigan on the road, do we consider them a legitimate college football playoff contender, or has Michigan not even really earned that right this season to be that sort of benchmark?
Well, you forget the bar for playoff contender is pretty low right now. I mean, if you're in the top 20, you're kind of sniffing around. There's a lot of football left to be played. I was higher than a lot of people coming into this season with USC because I thought, hey, listen, Miller Moss is an experienced guy. I think it's his 3rd or 4th year in the program. And Lincoln Riley is going to be able to have a functional offense, and they got a bunch of weapons. You know, they brought in a couple transfers. Zachariah Branch is pretty electric. They're going to have some pieces. Defensively, I love DeAnton Lynn turned UCLA from a disaster. They were outside the top 100 in defense to like top 15 last year. Now, granted, USC doesn't have a guy like Laiatu Latu as a wrecker up front, but they got some pieces. It's not a talent issue. And the defense has been much, much better. You know, they went from outside the top 100 in yards per contact or yards after contact to now they're like just outside the top 30. That tells me you figured out how to tackle. And that's directly an impact of your coordinator and having an offseason. So it seems like he's fixed another LA defense. We'll see. It's a long season. But for me, I like USC in this game. When you look at what Michigan's doing, it feels like to me, I don't really care that much about the quarterback change. I think it's going to be ugly either way. It feels like Sherrone Moore is trying to run the same playbook as last year and trying to be the same team without the offensive line to back it up. And you can't just keep running into a brick wall. It's not working. Donovan Edwards has really struggled. Khalil Mullings has looked much better. I think he's a guy that probably should get some more carries. And I don't know if they can digitally put him on the CFB 25 cover or replace Donovan Edwards. I don't know if they can do that. But he's been the better back for the Wolverines this year. But I like USC in this ball game.
David Ubben is a great reporter for The Athletic. All your college football needs you can read there, of course, at nytimes.com/athletic. Of course, the Until Saturday podcast is how you can listen to all his thoughts on the sport. Should be a great weekend. David, always good to see you. Thanks for stopping by. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it, guys. Take care.